I was not born into wealth, I was born into silence, into rooms where dreams were considered luxuries and survival was the only goal. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and everything I became was carved from years of relentless effort and quiet endurance. I built my life from nothing, not luck, not inheritance, not chance, but from the stubborn refusal to accept that I was meant to remain small. Every dollar I earned carried a memory, every success hid a sacrifice, and every smile I gave the world concealed the exhaustion I never allowed anyone to see. My late husband Richard used to say that I had a fire in me that could not be extinguished, and he was right, but what he did not know was that fire came from fear of losing everything, fear of being powerless again, fear of watching the people I loved suffer because I could not provide. We started with a single warehouse, a crumbling structure with leaking ceilings and broken windows, but to us it was the beginning of something bigger than ourselves. We worked day and night loading shipments, answering calls, making impossible promises, and then somehow finding a way to keep them. Richard handled operations while I handled everything else: finances, negotiations, strategy, and the endless problems that came with trying to build something from nothing. Those were the hardest years of my life, but also the most honest, because we knew exactly what we were fighting for. When Richard passed away, everything changed. The world did not pause for my grief. The business did not slow down, the responsibilities did not lessen, they doubled overnight, and I found myself standing alone in a space that suddenly felt too large, too heavy, too quiet. But I did not have the luxury of falling apart because I had a son. Daniel was only a boy then, with wide eyes and a heart that trusted the world too easily. I became everything for him: mother, father, protector, provider. I carried my grief in silence and turned it into strength. I worked longer hours, made harder decisions, and pushed myself beyond limits I did not know I had. Slowly the company grew from a struggling operation into a powerful enterprise. Contracts became larger, opportunities became endless, and my name began to carry weight in rooms that once ignored me. Years passed, and the small warehouse became a network of offices, buildings, and international deals, until one day I looked around and realized I had built something worth billions: a $2.7 billion empire that stood as proof of everything I had endured and overcome. But despite all the success, all the recognition, all the power, my greatest achievement was still my son. Daniel grew into a kind, intelligent man with a gentle nature that reminded me of his father. He was not hardened by struggle the way I was, and for that I was grateful. I wanted him to have a softer life, a life where he did not have to fight for every inch of ground the way I did. I protected him from the harsh realities of business for as long as I could, but eventually he stepped into the company, eager to learn, eager to prove himself. I saw so much hope in him, so much potential, and for the first time in years I allowed myself to imagine a future where I could finally step back, where I could rest, where everything I built would be in safe hands. That was when Sophia entered our lives. Daniel brought her home one evening, his face lit with a happiness I had not seen in years. She stood beside him, poised, elegant, and effortlessly charming. Her voice was soft, her smile warm, and her presence almost too perfect to question. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to act, exactly how to make a lasting impression. I welcomed her because she made my son happy, and that was enough. For me, at least at the time. She integrated into our lives, quickly learning our routines, our preferences, our history. She listened carefully when I spoke about the business, asked thoughtful questions, and showed an interest that seemed genuine. Daniel was completely taken by her, and I could see why. She had a way of making people feel important, seen, valued, but there was something beneath the surface, something I could not quite name, a subtle sharpness in her eyes, a calculation hidden behind her sweetness. I ignored it because I wanted to believe in her, because I trusted my son, and because after everything I had been through I wanted peace, not suspicion. Their relationship moved quickly. Engagement followed within months, and the wedding was nothing short of spectacular, a celebration of love and new beginnings. I stood there watching them exchange vows, feeling a mixture of pride and unease that I pushed deep down inside myself. I told myself it was normal for a mother to feel protective, to feel uncertain about the person who would share her son's life. I convinced myself that Sophia was exactly who she appeared to be: loving, devoted, sincere. After the wedding she became more involved in the company. At first it was small things, attending meetings, observing discussions, offering occasional suggestions, but gradually her role expanded. She spent more time with Daniel, guiding him, advising him, positioning herself as someone he could rely on. I admired her initiative, her willingness to step in and support him, but over time I began to notice patterns. The questions she asked became more specific, more focused on ownership structures, asset distribution, and legal authority. She showed a particular interest in my personal holdings, my shares, my will. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as curiosity or responsibility, but it grew more frequent, more pointed. One evening I walked past Daniel's office and heard her voice inside, speaking in a tone I had never heard before, low, sharp, Deliberate, I paused without meaning to listen, but the words stopped me cold. Once everything is transferred, it will all be ours, she said. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I wondered if I had misunderstood, if there was another explanation, another context that made those words harmless. But deep down I knew what I had heard, and I knew it was not innocent. The first confronted Daniel later that night, trying to keep my voice steady, my concerns measured, but he laughed it off, brushing aside my fears as overthinking is unnecessary worry. Sophia loves you, he said. She only wants what is best for us, for the family. I wanted to believe him, I truly did, but something inside me had shifted, a quiet warning that refused to be ignored. Still, I said nothing more because I did not want to create conflict. Because I did not want to risk pushing my son away, because I had spent my entire life fighting battles and I was tired, so I chose silence, I chose trust, and I chose to hope that I was wrong. But hope can be dangerous when it blinds you to the truth, and as I would soon learn, the greatest betrayals do not come from enemies, they come from the people you allow closest to your heart. The trip was not my idea, it never would have been if I had trusted the unease growing inside me, but Sophia had a way of presenting things that made refusal feel unreasonable. She called it a family retreat, a chance to reconnect, a moment to step away from the pressures of business and simply exist together as people, not as roles, not as responsibilities. Daniel supported her instantly, his voice full of hope and innocence as he said, "We needed this, that I needed rest, that the company could survive a few days without me." I remember looking at him and seeing the same boy I once protected from storms, now unknowingly leading me into one. I agreed, not because I believed in the trip, but because I believed in him. The location was a quiet riverside estate, far removed from the noise of the city, surrounded by dense trees and long stretches of water that reflected the sky like a mirror, untouched and endless. The moment we arrived, something felt wrong. It was not obvious, not something I could point to, but it settled in my chest like a weight. The air felt too still, the silence too complete, as if even nature was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed unusually calm, more than calm. She seemed satisfied, as if everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned. She guided us through the house, showed us the rooms, spoke about the beauty of the place and the peace it offered, but her eyes held something else, something colder, something hidden beneath the surface. Daniel remained unaware, completely at ease, trusting her, trusting the situation, trusting that everything was exactly what it appeared to be. The first day passed without incident. We shared a meal, spoke about small things, and pretended to be a normal family, but I noticed the way Sophia watched me when she thought I was not looking, the way her gaze lingered just a moment too long, the way her smile faded the second attention shifted away from her. That night I could not sleep. I stood by the window, staring out at the dark river, its surface barely visible under the faint light of the moon, and I felt a sense of finality I could not explain, as if something in my life was about to end, and not in the natural way, but in a way that would be forced, sudden, and irreversible. The next morning Sophia suggested a walk along the river, just the two of us, her tone light, her expression gentle. She said it would be nice to talk alone, to bond, to understand each other better. Daniel agreed without hesitation, saying he had a call he needed to take, something important, something that could not wait. I hesitated for a brief moment, my instincts urging me to refuse, but once again I ignored them. Once again I chose peace over suspicion. We walked in silence, at first the sound of water moving slowly beside us, the ground uneven beneath our feet, the trees casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly around us. Sophia spoke casually at first, asking about the early days of the company, about my struggles, about the choices I had made. Her voice carried curiosity but not admiration. It felt more like assessment, like she was measuring something, calculating something. Then her tone changed. It was subtle but undeniable. The warmth disappeared, replaced by something sharper, something real. "You have built quite a life," she said, her eyes fixed ahead, not on me. I nodded, unsure of where this was going. "It was not easy," I replied, "but it was worth it." She stopped walking, then turned to face me, and in that moment I saw it clearly. The mask was gone. There was no kindness, no softness, no pretense, only ambition, cold and unapologetic. "You have lived long enough," she said, the words simple, direct, and completely void of emotion. My body went still, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. I searched her face for any sign that this was a misunderstanding, a joke, something, anything that would make sense of the situation, but there was nothing, only certainty. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She stepped closer, her presence suddenly overwhelming. Her eyes locked onto mine with a confidence that made my heart begin to race. "You built everything," she continued, "and that is impressive, truly, but now it is time for someone else to enjoy it, someone younger, someone who knows how to use it properly." The realization hit me all at once, not in pieces, not gradually, but like a wave crashing down, leaving no room for denial. "You think Daniel will accept this?" I asked, holding onto the last thread Of hope that my son would never allow something like this to happen. She smiled then, and it was not the smile I had seen before. It was not charming or warm, it was victorious. Daniel believes whatever I tell him, she said calmly, and in that moment I understood everything. The questions, the involvement, the careful positioning, it had all been leading to this moment, this decision, this betrayal. I took a step back, my mind racing, my instincts finally screaming at me to move, to run, to do something, but before I could react, before I could even fully turn, she pushed me. It was sudden, forceful, and without hesitation my foot slipped on the uneven ground and the world tilted violently. The sky disappeared, replaced by the cold, dark surface of the river rushing up to meet me. I remember the impact, the shock of the water stealing the air from my lungs, the freezing temperature wrapping around my body like chains, pulling me down faster than I could comprehend. I tried to scream, but the water filled my mouth, my throat, my senses. Everything became chaotic, disoriented. My arms moved instinctively, searching for something to hold onto, but there was nothing, only emptiness, only depth. I could feel myself sinking, the weight of my clothes dragging me further down, the light above growing weaker, more distant, and for a brief moment time seemed to slow. I looked up through the water, and I saw her standing at the edge, looking down at me, not with panic, not with regret, but with calm observation, as if she were watching something expected, something inevitable. There was no attempt to help, no sign of hesitation. She simply watched as I disappeared beneath the surface, and in that moment I understood the full extent of her betrayal. This was not impulsive, this was not emotional, this was planned, deliberate, and executed without mercy. My body began to weaken, the cold numbing my limbs, the lack of air tightening around my chest. My thoughts started to fade, replaced by fragments of memories. Daniel as a child, running toward me, laughing. Richard standing beside me in that old warehouse, promising we would build something that mattered. The years of struggle, the victories, the sacrifices, everything I had lived for, everything I had built, all slipping away in silence. I felt the darkness closing in, my strength leaving me, my movements slowing until they stopped completely, and just before everything went black, one final thought crossed my mind, not fear, not regret, but realization. The people you trust the most are the ones who know exactly how to destroy you. Death did not take me that night, though it came closer than I ever imagined possible. The river should have been my end, a silent grave that erased me from the world, just as Sophia intended, but fate, or perhaps something stronger, refused to let my story end that way. When I opened my eyes again, it was not to darkness, but to a dim flickering light above me, and the distant sound of voices that felt both real and unreal at the same time. My body ached in ways I could not describe. Every breath felt heavy, every movement impossible, and for a moment I did not understand where I was or why I was still alive. I later learned that a fisherman had found me miles downstream, my body caught against a cluster of branches. Barely conscious, barely breathing. He could have ignored me, could have assumed I was already gone, but he did not. He pulled me from the water and carried me to a small rural clinic far from the city, far from anyone who knew my name or my life. For weeks I remained there, drifting between awareness and darkness, my identity unknown, my presence unnoticed by the world that had already accepted my death. The doctors treated me as a nameless survivor, a fragile woman who had somehow escaped the river's grasp. They asked questions, but I gave no answers, not because I could not, but because I chose not to. In those quiet moments, lying in that narrow bed staring at the ceiling, I began to understand the truth of my situation. Sophia believed I was dead. Daniel believed it too. The company, the empire I had built over decades, was now vulnerable, exposed, and most likely already slipping into their control. The thought should have filled me with panic, with anger, with desperation, but instead it brought something else. Something colder, something sharper, clarity. The woman who had trusted, who had hoped, who had chosen silence over conflict was gone. The river had taken her, and in her place was someone who understood the cost of betrayal, someone who would never again ignore the warnings that rose within her. I did not rush to reveal myself. I did not call out to the world to announce that I was still alive. Instead, I remained hidden, allowing the illusion of my death to settle into reality, allowing Sophia to believe she had succeeded, because that belief would become my greatest advantage. As my body slowly healed, my mind grew stronger. Every day I replayed the events leading up to the river, every word, every look, every moment of doubt I had dismissed, and I began to piece together the full extent of Sophia's plan. This was not a sudden act of greed, it was a carefully constructed strategy built over time. She had studied my life, my business, my habits. She had inserted herself into every critical point, gaining access to information, influence, and ultimately control. Daniel had been her gateway. His trust, his love, his blind faith in her had made everything possible. I felt a brief moment of pain when I thought of him. Not anger, not yet, but a deep sadness that he had been used so easily, manipulated without ever realizing it. But even that feeling began to fade, replaced by a stronger emotion, resolve. I would not allow myself to be a victim, not after everything I had survived, not after everything I had built once I regained enough strength. I asked for a phone, not to call my son, not to contact anyone who might expose me, but to reach the one person I knew I could trust without hesitation, my legal advisor, Mr. Grant. He had been with me since the earliest days of the company, a man defined by loyalty, discretion, and an unwavering sense of duty. When he answered and heard my voice, there was a long silence on the other end, followed by a quiet disbelief. "Mrs. Hayes, they said you were dead," he whispered. "I was supposed to be," I replied, my tone steady, my mind already moving ahead of the moment. I told him everything, not the emotions, not the pain, but the facts, the betrayal, the attempt on my life, the situation now unfolding within the company. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, his response was immediate. "Then we do not waste time." Through him I began to see what had happened in my absence. Sophia had wasted no time in securing her position. Documents had been prepared, signatures had been transferred, authority had shifted under the guise of legal procedure and grief. Daniel now stood as the public face of the company, but it was clear who was truly in control. Sophia had positioned herself behind every decision, every move, every change. She had not only tried to remove me, she had already begun to replace me, but in her confidence she had overlooked one critical detail. She believed the story was over. She believed there would be no consequences, and that belief made her careless. Under Mr. Grant's guidance, we began gathering evidence quietly, methodically, without drawing attention. Financial records were examined, transactions traced, communications analyzed, patterns identified. What we uncovered was more than enough to reveal the truth. Forged documents, unauthorized transfers, and clear indications of manipulation, all carefully hidden but not well enough to escape scrutiny. When someone knew where to look, each discovery strengthened my resolve, each piece of evidence a reminder that I had not imagined the threat, that I had not overreacted, that my instincts had been right all along, and yet I had ignored them. The realization did not weaken me, it sharpened me, it forced me to confront my own mistakes, not with regret but with understanding, because acknowledging them meant I would never repeat them. As the days turned into weeks, my recovery became more than physical, it became a transformation. I was no longer the woman who built an empire through endurance alone. I was now someone who understood strategy on a deeper level, someone who could see beyond appearances, someone who would never again underestimate the quiet dangers that hide behind familiar faces. I changed my appearance slightly, nothing dramatic, but enough to avoid recognition if needed. I moved carefully, avoided unnecessary exposure, and focused entirely on preparing for what would come next. This was not about revenge in the way most people understand it. It was not about anger or punishment. It was about balance, about restoring what had been taken, about ensuring that actions had consequences and that betrayal did not go unanswered. The plan began to take shape, not rushed, not reckless, but precise. Every step calculated, every move intentional. I would not confront Sophia in private. I would not give her the opportunity to deny, to manipulate, to twist the truth. Instead, I would choose the moment carefully, a moment where the truth could not be ignored, where the evidence would speak louder than any words she could offer, and where the illusion she had built would collapse completely under the weight of reality. I knew exactly where that moment would be: the annual board meeting, the place where power was displayed, where decisions were made, and where Sophia would undoubtedly attempt to solidify her control. It was the perfect stage, not just for revelation, but for justice. As the day approached, I felt no fear, no hesitation, only a steady calm that came from knowing I was ready. The woman who had been pushed into the river had not drowned. She had endured, she had learned, and she had returned stronger than ever. And this time I would not be the one caught off guard. This time I would be the one in control. The day of the board meeting arrived with a quiet intensity that felt almost unreal, as if the world itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold. The building stood tall and unchanged, a symbol of everything I had created and everything that had been taken from me. Yet as I approached its doors, I felt no hesitation, no fear, only a calm certainty that this moment belonged to me. Inside the boardroom, Sophia sat at the head of the table, exactly where I once sat, her posture confident, her expression composed, and her presence carefully crafted to command respect. Daniel sat beside her, his face serious but uncertain, as if some part of him sensed that something was not right, even if he could not yet understand what it was. The board members filled the room, their attention fixed on Sophia as she began to speak, her voice steady, her words deliberate. She spoke of vision, of growth, of a new era for the company, presenting herself as the natural successor to everything I had built, and for a moment it almost worked. The room listened, the room believed. The illusion she had constructed so carefully seemed complete until it was not. The doors opened without warning, the sound echoing through the room like a signal that something had shifted. Every head turned, every conversation stopped, and in that instant the illusion shattered, because I walked in, alive, present, undeniable. The reaction was immediate: shock, disbelief, fear. It spread across the room like a wave. Daniel stood up so quickly his chair fell behind him, his eyes wide, his voice breaking as he spoke my name, as if He were seeing a ghost. Sophia did not move at first, her body frozen, her expression locked between denial and realization, as if her mind was struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with what she believed to be true. I walked forward slowly, each step measured, each movement deliberate, not rushed, not emotional, but controlled. I could feel every eye on me, every breath held in silence as I reached the center of the room and faced them all. "You should have made sure I was dead," I said, my voice calm, but carrying a weight that could not be ignored. The words settled heavily in the air, and with them the truth began to surface. Sophia stood then, her composure cracking, her voice rising in protest. "This is not possible," she said. "This is some kind of trick." But even as she spoke, the certainty in her tone had vanished, replaced by something far more revealing, fear. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I turned to Mr. Grant, who stood near the entrance, his presence quiet but firm. He stepped forward, placing a set of documents on the table along with recorded evidence that spoke louder than any accusation ever could. The room shifted from shock to realization as the details unfolded: the forged signatures, the unauthorized transfers, the manipulation, the plan to seize control of everything, and finally the attempt on my life. Each piece undeniable, each fact supported, each lie dismantled in front of everyone. Sophia tried to interrupt, tried to deny, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The narrative she had built collapsed under the weight of truth. Her words lost meaning, her confidence dissolved completely. As security entered the room at my request, they approached her without hesitation, and for the first time she looked small, not powerful, not calculated, but exposed. She turned to Daniel, then, her voice desperate as she tried to pull him back into her version of reality. "Tell them it is not true," she said. "Tell them you trust me." But Daniel did not move. He stood there frozen, his mind clearly struggling to process everything that had been revealed. His eyes moved from her to me, and in that moment I saw something break inside him. The blind trust he once carried replaced by a painful awareness of how deeply he had been deceived. As security escorted Sophia out of the room, she resisted. At first her voice raised, her composure gone completely, but even that resistance faded quickly as the reality of her situation became undeniable. The door closed behind her, and with it the chapter she had tried to write for my life ended. The room remained silent for a moment, the weight of everything still settling before the board members began to speak, their reactions a mixture of disbelief, concern, and respect. But I did not focus on them. My attention remained on Daniel. He slowly stepped forward, his expression filled with regret, his voice unsteady as he tried to find the words. "Mom, I did not know," he said. "I swear I did not know." I listened without interrupting, not because I doubted him, but because I needed him to understand that some truths do not erase consequences. "I believe you," I said finally, my voice softer but no less firm. "But trust once broken does not return the same way." He lowered his head, the weight of those words clearly affecting him, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to feel the sadness of what had been lost, not just the betrayal, but the innocence, the simplicity of the relationship we once had. But I did not let that feeling control me. I had learned too much to fall back into old patterns. Turning back to the board, I resumed my place, not as someone reclaiming power, but as someone who had never truly lost it. The company moved quickly to correct the damage. Authority was restored, control reestablished, and the structures Sophia had manipulated were dismantled piece by piece. The process was efficient, precise, and necessary. By the end of the meeting, the empire I had built was once again firmly in my hands, but more importantly, it was protected in ways it had never been before. Daniel remained by my side throughout the process, not speaking much, but observing, learning, understanding the reality of what leadership truly required: not just ambition, but awareness; not just trust, but discernment. In the days that followed, the story spread, not publicly, not in a way that would damage the company, but within the circles that mattered. The truth became known, and with it came a renewed respect, not just for what I had built, but for what I had survived. Sophia faced the consequences of her actions. Legal proceedings moved forward. Her attempts to manipulate the system failed under the weight of evidence, and the future she had tried to steal from me disappeared before her eyes. As for me, I did not celebrate. There was no satisfaction in her downfall, no sense of victory in the traditional sense. What I felt instead was closure, a quiet understanding that justice had been served, not through anger, not through revenge, but through truth and preparation. I returned to my work with a different perspective, stronger, more aware, and no longer willing to ignore the signs that once seemed insignificant. The woman who had been pushed into the river no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had faced betrayal, death, and loss, and emerged with something far more valuable: clarity and strength. And as I looked out over everything I had rebuilt, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: no one would ever underestimate me again.